I think it is now time to invite Minister Marc Miller, Minister of Crown-Indigenous Services Canada, to the microphone. We will be having a 10-minute presentation, and then we'll have 20 minutes for questions.
Hello, bonjour, Israel, Wakwanuara Nuize. I want to thank the elders today for guiding us in opening up the day's event and yesterday's, the Chiefs in Assembly, National Chief, Executive, for inviting me to have this brief moment to speak. I'm grateful to be here in person on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Before I get going to the formal aspects of my speech, it's perhaps, and I acknowledge, highly inadequate to hear these words in the circumstances to Noel Wassoup's family, but my deepest condolences on behalf of myself and my family, and on behalf of Canada. It's the inevitable realization through too many of these testimonies is Canada continues to fail you. This tragedy is ongoing. And we have to recognize as a society that we're doing far too little to bring it to an end. My speech contemplates talking about what Canada is doing to put an end to this tragedy. And it falls short of expressing the pain that the family is feeling. And perhaps, if the family is willing, we could meet after this to talk in private. But everything we're facing is, as a country and as a challenge with this ongoing tragedy, is one that is interconnected, whether we're talking about the incarceration of Indigenous peoples in unacceptable, rates. I'm talking about numbers, but this is about people. Every woman in jail means a child essentially gets taken into care, or a man in jail means they grow up without a father. And it perpetuates a cycle of violence, prejudice, fueled by systemic racism that is characteristic of not only child and family services, but also the prison system and the justice system as it is today. And despite the reforms that this government, our government, is putting into place, it's going far too slowly. And despite the investments that we're making, while significant, the tragedy is ongoing. The family had the courage to speak about the systemic aspect of this, and what the final report into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and 2S LGBTQIA people underscored was this is part of a system, and it has to be addressed in a systematic way. These are matters that can't be solved overnight. To think they are would to underestimate the gravity of the situation. But it's one where all parts of the country, and whether it's the provincial government, territorial government, municipal government, individuals, your neighbors, need to be engaged on. And I salute the courage of the family that shouldn't have to be up here. They should be thriving with Noel. But they need, your courage is one that is needed because no one else is speaking up about it. People like me aren't speaking up about it. And we can talk about it as elected officials, and as highly esteemed as we are by our peers, perhaps, but if regular folks aren't talking about it and recognizing the degree and scope of the tragedy, then again, we're continuing to fail. And it isn't limited to our borders. We know it's happening in the South, and we know it's happening in many countries around the world. We're nearing 7 years since the release of the Truth and Reconciliation's final report, and while progress has been slower than we'd like, our government continues to be committed to implementing all the 94 calls to action. I think we're all eager to hearing one in particular being completed by the end of this month. The ones that are the federal government's responsibility, without shirking our responsibility to ensure others are advanced, stands at 17 completed. Far too little, far too few. À ce jour, des 17 des 76 appels à l'action relevant de la responsabilité sont complétés. C'est bien trop peu qu'on l'espérait. Il y en a bien d'autres qui sont en voie d'être complétés. Par exemple, nous mettons en œuvre la Déclaration des Nations unies sur le droit des peuples autochtones en répondant notamment à l'appel à l'action numéro 43. Nous travaillons, comme vous le savez tous, depuis au-delà d'un an à aider les communautés, avec les communautés à l'avant-plan, pour retrouver et commémorer les enfants disparus qui ont fréquenté les pensionnats en réponse aux appels à l'action 72 et à 76. Et à cet égard, nous soutenons, parce que c'est connecté, l'avenir dans tout ça et de la reconnaissance de la vérité passe par la réforme de l'éducation. Les initiatives d'éducation et de sensibilisation par l'entremise, entre autres, du Centre national pour la vérité et de réconciliation et la nouvelle Journée nationale pour la vérité et réconciliation le 30 septembre en réponse aux appels à l'action, notamment 78 et 80. Pour que le gouvernement et l'ensemble du Canada soient sur la bonne voie et responsables de la mise en œuvre des appels à l'action, nous avons établi les bases pour mettre en œuvre et financer un Conseil national de réconciliation. Le 22 juin, soit il y a 2 semaines, nous avons déposé au Parlement le projet de loi C-28, la loi sur le Conseil national pour la réconciliation, et s'il est adopté, le projet de loi permettra la création du Conseil national pour la réconciliation afin de répondre à l'appel à l'action 53 et ensuite les appels allant jusqu'à l'appel 56. It isn't up to Canada to be giving itself grades on these matters, whether it's the response to the final report into murdered missing Indigenous women and girls and to us LGBTQIA people, or the calls to action. People like me shouldn't be standing here telling you what type of job and how well it's being done. It really rests on the shoulders of a national council made up predominantly of eminent Indigenous people that can help hold us to account, because I know through all this, whether it's our response to the final report into murdered missing Indigenous women and girls or the TRC calls to action, we shouldn't be giving ourselves grades. We should be at a level of accountability that we aren't here as a country. So whether we're talking about an ombudsman or whether we're talking about a national council that can work with the data that we provide to them and that they are entitled to really push us along and push our partners, the provinces and territories, it's something that we are dedicated to. And indeed, in Budget 2019, for the Commission, of which there's an interim one in place, $126 million was provided for. Part of this is trying to make reconciliation irreversible for any government. That means putting the institutions and the structures in place so that no government can turn that around. Since the first finding of unmarked burials announced by Kamloops just over a year ago, our government's been working directly with communities to support your plans to locate and commemorate the children who died at residential schools. To date, with respect to specific fundings coming from Crown-Indigenous relations, over $90 million has been invested to support more than 84 initiatives in research, knowledge gathering, commemoration, memorialization, and fieldwork investigation around the sites of former residential schools. And I know this probably needn't be said or should be said, but when it comes to those who are courageously speaking up for the first time, or those who continue to suffer in silence, we need to honor your truths. And in the wave of denialism that continues to affect this country, it's important for people to say to survivors, we believe you and Canada believes you. Le mois dernier, Kim Murray a été nommée interlocutrice spéciale indépendante pour les enfants disparus et les tombes et les lieux d'inhumation non marqués associés au pensionnat afin de faire le lien entre les communautés et le gouvernement. Kim Murray will add another layer of accountability to this government on these particular calls to action, and her work will be key in informing us, in informing Minister Hajdu and Minister Lametti on the path forward in making sure that we are held to account, as well as potentially additional legislation that needs to be introduced to protect these sites. None of the progress would have been possible if it weren't for your advocacy, your hard work, your commitment to working with our government as we address the consequences of our colonial history. And as we make strides to address the legacy of residential schools, other tragedies continue to occur in this country, as I mentioned earlier. The violence has to stop. On June 3rd, the third anniversary of the National Inquiry and the first anniversary of the National Action Plan and Federal Pathway, we released a progress report on federal efforts and reaffirmed our commitment to continue working with families and communities to end the national tragedy. One thing we heard clearly was that need for increased accountability in the work that needs to be done by our government to put into place an ombudsman to keep our feet to the fire. Over the past 50 years, more than 50 initiatives and programs led by 25 federal organizations have made significant advances. It includes work to build affordable housing, shelters, and safe cultural spaces to protect Indigenous languages and to address discrimination in healthcare. Budget 2021 in particular established a little over $100 million to reestablish and revitalize safe cultural spaces across the country. And I've had the deep honor to go into communities and work with leadership, often grassroots organizations that have been fighting for these institutions for far too long, and make some key announcements to keep people safe, something that is a basic need, a basic necessity, but needs infrastructure and funding. They're well oversubscribed, but it's work that needs to continue to keep people safe.
Closing comments, please.
All right, I'm almost done. I had a lot more to talk about, but I do want to, first and foremost, I do want to talk about some of the accomplishments that we've had over the last 6 years. Over the last 6 years, over $9 billion in settlements have been made. This is a lot of work that needs to continue ongoing. It's thanks to your advocacy that we are here. I don't consider these things victories of Canada. For Siksika and the $1.3 billion settlement that they had, this is a victory for their community that's been 100 years in the making. For Shoal Lake 40 First Nation that lifted 7 water advisories, not a victory of Canada, it's Shoal Lake's victory. They've been fighting us and telling us what to do. And it's their victory that they now have access to clean water. This is the work that's ongoing. It's the work that our government is dedicated to. It's the work that needs to become irreversible, and we can't do it without you. We can't do it from a podium in Ottawa anymore. We have to do it on the ground with you. COVID has kept us stuck on Zoom. I'm glad that everyone still has legs, but it's something that I hope to get out into communities, and I hope my fellow ministers who don't necessarily deal with Indigenous matters on a daily basis, but their work is so key to the work that's ongoing, need to do, and to talk to real people and get work done once they hear it. Miigwech, thank you. Merci.
Well, and Minister Miller. So the way we will proceed is, again, microphone 1, 2, and then we'll look towards Zoom. We'll take 3 questions at a time and then allow the minister the chance to respond. Just a reminder for those who are joining us on Zoom, because this is a hybrid assembly, you have to use the raise hand function if you want to get onto the speakers list. So if I could have microphone 1, please.
Mike Morris, Nikas, Hik, Kasbanakalig Doji, Zigabes, Nananski, Gwinagumam Guardian, Economics in what. My name is Mike Morris. I'm a proxy for Economics of Inuk, where I was born and raised many years ago. I really don't have my question, but what I would like you to do, Mr. Minister, is to take my questions back, and the next time that we have a National Chiefs meeting, if we could bring some answers back. I'll say this. I always carry the James Bay Treaty, Treaty 9 with me wherever I go. My grandfather was a signatory, so he left me a big responsibility. And one of our uncles left Kichinamextip in the late 70s and went to the World Court. After he came back, I went to visit him and asked him, why is it that you had to go overseas? His answer was, it's for the letter S. You know that letter S? Not the Seattle, but the letter S. What he was talking about is, you know, there is in international law, there is a difference between peoples and people. And the chiefs need to start using that word peoples, because peoples means we have a government, we have land, we have everything. People means I'm part of your mosaic that you call Canada, that you can celebrate on Canada Day. But the question I have is, Sharon Ben gifted me with this book about 2 years ago. No, about 4 years ago now. I was part of a protest that started from where the Alberta people wrote the 1970 white paper. That we started from that building and we went to the hotel where the AFN chiefs were having this assembly, and we almost got kicked out. But anyway, what I want to ask you is, there are 3 versions of the UNDRIP that are being talked about here. It's the 3rd version that Canada is exploiting at this time that has been sold to the chiefs that are gathered here. In the first version that was approved by the Indigenous representatives at the United Nations, there were 45 articles. In version 2 and version 3 that Canada accepted, the 46th article showed up. And that's what I want you to take back to your government and ask them. Article 46 talks about 2 things: territorial integrity and political unity. And it talks about the state. I'm assuming that means Canada. Canada's political unity and territorial integrity. This land that we stand on. You can say with what's written there that this land belongs to Canada. It doesn't belong to our people. And even we,
question, please,
as part of the political unity of Canada, are only Aboriginal Canadians. And that's what I want you to take back to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, and come back the next time we see you with these answers to these 2 questions. Number 1, where is my territorial integrity to my homeland? Where is my political unity as the nation, the people of the nation that I belong to, that signed Treaty 9 with King George V of Great Britain many years ago in 1929? If you could take those questions back, come back to us next time, we'll be nice, and you can give us the answers. So thank you. Miigwech Wajia.
Thank you, Lank Lewis. I'll now go to microphone number 2.
Hansla in Jawa and Squash, Lease Behind Cook, Bivinsaletku, in the Cup Nation. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the 3 host nations for allowing us to do this important work in their unceded territory. Thank you for the speech, Minister Miller. I'd like to thank my fellow chiefs for standing beside me here. I asked Chief Stu Jackson to stand beside me from Lower Nicola Band, Chief Harvey McLeod from Upper Nicola Band, and Chief Marcel Shackley to stand beside me from Nuich Band. Sending out an invitation to you, Minister Miller, to first of all come sit with me and my council on the unresolved issues of the existing pipeline that sits right in the center of the Coldwater Indian Band. Those issues have been going on unresolved for over 13 years now. So an invitation for you to come back and sit with me and my council, but that's for one day. Another day, we'd like you to come and sit with our chiefs in the valley on the other unresolved issues that we have. You know, when I first became chief, we got together the 5 chiefs of the Nicola Valley. It took us a week to get the attention of then Premier Christy Clark to speak with us. We had to sit in her office for a whole week, but we finally got the attention of the Premier. So I'm hoping, Minister, that you're paying attention and you're listening, so that way we don't have to go to Ottawa to occupy your office to get your attention. Because these are very important unresolved issues that the Government of Canada needs to hear us out as leadership. Kukstam, thank you.
Thank you all to all these chiefs. We will now be going for our third question to our Zoom chat. And I see we have Proxy Kevin Hart. If we could have his microphone unmuted and put up on the screen, please.
Good afternoon. I'll just see if the chair can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you, Proxy Hart.
Thumbs up. Good afternoon, Minister Miller. It's been a while. I just want to say that we know that the federal government had an interim report of the National Inquiry. And since that time, we've had the final report of the National Inquiry. And now we have the implementation, so to speak, from the government of those recommendations. However, when we had the interim report, what I wanted to see is for some transparency and accountability is to see what the federal government did in terms of implementing those interim recommendations in the interim report that was released years ago, as well as give us a report card probably in December of what the federal government's done to date on the existing National Inquiry final report. As you know, we're still waiting for resources to protect our most vulnerable people. We could see it there on the streets in Vancouver. We could see it across this nation, as well as in our First Nations. You know, we hear of our women going missing each and every day. We hear of the families that are struggling with police brutality. In some cases, we heard from Chantel's family just a while ago, which was heartbreaking. So I want to ask the minister, as well as the federal government, to bring back a report card to us, the chiefs in assembly in December, to show us what you've done the past, as well as what the dollar amounts were in terms of investments to address each and every one of those recommendations in that final report. Thank you.
Thank you to Proxy Hart. So I will now turn the mic over. If we could have the minister's microphone open, please.
And thank you for the questions. I'll perhaps take them in reverse order. And Proxy Hart, nice to hear your voice. Again, as I'd mentioned, I think in my speech, it isn't our business to grade ourselves, but there is, in terms of a report card, but I understand what you were getting at. I think the report that was issued just a couple weeks ago does give you a sketch of what's going on. It's far too little. And I think clearly what we've heard from survivors and families is there is a need for increased accountability, whether that's an ombudsman or other forms of keeping the federal government to account. I can tell you what we're seeing right now, and despite historic investments of well over $2 billion, is one challenge getting those monies on the ground, getting shelters built while the tragedy is ongoing, addressing some of the systemic aspects of what the report asked us to address, continuing to erect jurisdictional barriers and even bureaucratic barriers to a tragedy that knows no borders. Clearly, those are some of the constructive criticism and legitimate criticism that we've heard. I want to see those investments hit the ground faster than they clearly have, whether that's in downtown Winnipeg or downtown Montreal, or in the far north. There are a number of challenges, but it should not be an excuse for us or any other government that is responsible for their part of the action plan. Again, I hope to be able in December to give a better sense of where those are going, tracking the money and giving chiefs and council a sense of where that money is going, whether it's in your own communities or whether it's into urban communities, is something that I'd like to see a better job done by us. Chief Span, I was listening. I was just trying to make sure it was you, because usually you're wearing a Blue Jays hat, which bugs me to no end. But I'll leave that to another discussion. I lost my Expos, so I had to go and choose the Red Sox, sadly. But Cooksjam, for your comments, I'm more than glad to meet you. I know it's long overdue. We have had in the past the occasion over Zoom to discuss a number of these issues and resolved a few, but there are ones that are connected in and around the pipeline, and glad to meet with you on that basis. And to Mike Morris, and I think we can have a practical and a philosophical discussion over the final article on United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. If that wasn't in there, I would not think that I would think that a number of countries wouldn't have signed it in the first place, and I can't discount Canada from that criticism, given the time it took to actually sign the United Nations Declarations on Rights of Indigenous Peoples. These are statements that are key. They are a shining light into how our behavior needs to be, how we need to document the spirit and intent of what our relationship needs to be. We need to have a discussion on land. When you talk about territorial integrity, I understand the reasons why it's in UNDRIP, but I also understand the spirit of intent of treaties and why they were signed. And the need to make sure that land that has gone, that has been taken, dispossessed, and stolen at times, are issues that need to be resolved in a way at times that money cannot replace. And the issue of territorial integrity gives an excuse for governments to do less. And that's not something that we want to entertain, given the fact that land is so integral to identity and I would say as well, economic development. So these aren't issues that we can talk in the abstract about, but I did want to give you a sketch of what my answer might be, but I owe you a more complete answer on that particular point. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Miller. And just being sensitive of the minister's already openness to our process, I'd like to ask that the next questions be somewhat quick. So microphone 1.
Good afternoon, Minister Miller. Chairman, I don't have a question, but I have a very important message from my nation and my trilateral team for the minister. In 2002, we signed our TSA agreement, and finally in 2019, you and your department approved $16.8 million for us to build a subdivision adjacent to the town of Fort Smith. And COVID came along, and you approved another amount up to $23 million. And I'm proud to say that work is going along good. We'll soon have 39 service lots, completely serviced, pavement, everything, and we'll be able to build 39 homes, for badly needed homes for our community. I don't have time to go into the history of how we ended up scattered all over Fort Smith. I'll just say we had a landslide there in 1968. You have to pardon me because I've developed Parkinson's lately, and sometimes I can't read my own writing. If that damn nun would have left me alone, I would have been left-handed and I would be able to write good. but my hand gets shaky. Not only will we have 39 homes, lots available, we will be, our businesses will be connected to the town services. We have a petrol station, we have a petrol station convenience store, and a Tim Hortons. And we'll be able to look at building other businesses once we get our infrastructure put in there. So with that, I just want to say thank you from our nation and our trilateral team. I guess it's not very often you hear success stories, so thank you.
For the record, could you state your name and community, Chief?
Pardon?
Could you state your name and your community?
Yeah, okay. Chief David Putra, Salt River First Nation, Fort Smith, Northwest Territories.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Microphone number 2, please.
Bonjour. Bonjour, Minister. Bonjour, Kinawea. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chief Dean Sayers, Batchewana First Nation in Ontario, Ogaman, Nemanagoshin, Goyakusid, Miigwech Kibajaya, Minister. I'm honored to be able to be here today in this beautiful territory, and I really appreciate the warm welcome and the beautiful medicine that's provided by the people here in the West Coast. I do want to make a couple of comments, Minister, to you in regards to your role and as somewhat of the eyes and the ears of your government. I'm one of the negotiators with the Robinson-Huron Treaty Annuities litigation, and one of the first things I want to make mention of is that we really need you to follow up and provide properly mandated representatives to come to the table and negotiate. I know we did have some preliminary discussions, and thank you for taking the time to meet with us, but we really need to move this along prior to the fall, when we recognize that there will be further litigation, possibly stage 3, where a judge will determine the numbers. But in the meantime, if you could maybe avert the court process and have properly equipped mandated representatives to negotiate and settle this litigation out of court, and it is troubling for my people, and we've waited a long time to have proper annuities and payments as per sharing the lands and the resources. So thank you for that. The other thing, I do have a couple of elders in the room, and we really want to sit with you to have some discussions in regards to treaty implementation. The annuities is just one clause, and there are so many other areas that we need to have some discussions. The level of frustration and impatience is really growing amongst my people, and there's so many jurisdictions that are exercised by Canada, improperly exercised by Canada. We really need to take inventory of that and see what's still in our canoe, what's in your ship. So we'd really love to have those discussions additionally. I also wanted to make mention further that we as a people in my neck of the woods are looking forward collectively with the 21 chiefs as well to addressing and visiting many more jurisdictional areas that are confrontational to some degree with these exercises of jurisdiction by some representatives of the Crown. So we do need to have those discussions, and I'm looking forward to them and meeting personally with you in the next little while to have these hopefully fruitful discussions. Okay? Jimmy Gwetch.
Thank you, Chief Sayers. And our final question will come from our Zoom. We have Chief Darlene Bernard, who has her hand up. If we could have her unmuted and posted onto the screens, please.
Way?
Chief Bernard, we can hear you.
Awesome. Minister Miller, I think you know me. I'm Chief Darlene Bernard of the Lennox Island First Nation in Abequet, Prince Edward Island. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, like, I know that what you were saying, there was going to be a lot more supports and things like that with regard to mental health, homelessness and stuff like that. So I just wanted to say, like, in the PEI region, we've done really good at keeping people alive during COVID, but it was at a cost, and the cost was in mental health and addiction issues. And, you know, so the trauma among our population has drastically increased, you know, because of COVID, being isolated, but as well as the trauma from having to go through a very not a great day school process to be able to get their claims done. And I'm hearing a lot from a lot of people that they need to have that claims process extended. So I'd like to know what your thoughts on that would be. And as well, I wanted to talk about the mental health and wellness of our men and boys in our communities. One of the things in PEI here that's really standing out to us in the last couple of years is our men and boys are really, really struggling, and we do not have the proper supports in place to be able to provide them with the services that they need, especially with regard to infrastructure in our communities. And I'm happy to hear that there's going to be more money put towards these kind of things, because I think that we really do need to have safe homes for our people in our community who are going away to get treatment and coming back and not having any kind of supports around them. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and just wondered if you would offer some insight on whether or not the day school process deadline could be extended. Thank you, Walalan.
Walalan to Chief Bernard. Minister Miller.
Thank you, and this time I'll go in order of appearance. I really appreciate the thanks for some of the work that's being done around housing. That I can't read my own handwriting either at times, but it's not because of any particular condition. We know that the housing crisis, though, is something that will require significant investments in budgets for years to come, and making sure that that hits the ground and it's keeping your people safe, both physically and mentally, is an aspect of housing, I think, that is sort of under-talked about. We talk about a roof over people's heads, but it fulfills a lot of functions in closing socioeconomic gaps, and it's something that perhaps Minister Haidu will speak to later, but it is so key in making sure that we are relentless in making those investments in the view of closing the gap by 2030, which will be certainly a tall order and can't be done in any particular budgetary cycle. But that relentless advocacy that comes from you, that comes from your grassroots, whether it's in the quote-unquote on-reserve scenario in the far north or in the urban setting, is something the federal government definitely has a role. Both the TRC and the final report into murder and missing Indigenous women and girls has said so quite clearly. Chief Sayers, obviously you know the position of Canada. We want to be at the negotiation table and settle this in a good way. I think as well that we object to the position that the government of Ontario has taken in this respect, but you know, we're looking to keep pushing our partner into working with them in solving this and making sure there is a proper mandate to get both sides of the Crown on the same page with settling this historic treaty. And I think the general reflection as well, and I think you hit the nail on the head, is even when we are moving and deploying historic sums to both compensate for matters that shouldn't have happened in the first place, notably the failure of Canada to honour its historic treaty obligations, we're doing so now in more of a transactional way than in the way that really should be our nation-to-nation or Crown-to-treaty partner relationship, which is respecting the spirit and intent of a treaty in the sacred way that you hold high your treaties, which were the conditions upon which Canada was built. And I do take that to heart when you say that, because there is an aspect of this, I think, that we as a government fail to neglect in honouring treaties. To Chief Bernard, and it's 2 points. I guess on the day school, as everyone notes, and I think has been highlighted throughout the last few days, the deadline is July 13th. It is not one that is set in stone. There is a 6-month period afterwards where people can apply. I have heard from communities and from survivors of day schools and their family members about the inadequacy of the process. I do find it frustrating and deeply concerning. Canada doesn't administer this process. It was a court-administered process, so I can't stand up in court and say this should happen, no matter no matter how important it is, it takes work from plaintiffs' counsel and support for any work that we would do in order to change that timeline. For clarity, we have engaged with class counsel and asked what the options were, what the work was being done to extend some flexibility into January for what would be considered exceptional circumstances. The sense we've gotten is that it will be very flexible. But again, in the coming days, we'll be working to look at what those options are to clearly echo in front of the court what we've heard from you today and what we've heard over my consultations in communities about not only the process not capturing enough people, but needing to be extended given the trauma and sometimes the reluctance of people to step forward, even if it is simply to fill out a form, because we know how traumatic that can be and re-traumatizing that it can be. That I think. And Chief Bernard, I do appreciate you raising this, because what we've seen and what we're working for, and again, perhaps Minister Haidu may speak to this on the Child and Family Services reform and fixing a system that is broken so that we don't not only repeat the cycle of litigation and bad behavior that Canada has been engaged in, but also fix a system that is forcing people into care as opposed to fundamentally focusing on prevention and healing in a culturally sensitive way. On Canada Day, Minister Haidu and I authorized the signing of a historic settlement agreement which will compensate to the extent money can, which it can't necessarily, children that were apprehended going back to the 1990s, which is 3 or 4 court cases all wrapped into one, including the one most talked about in front of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. It will also compensate for the horrific experience that many have experienced over their time in care. And this is truly something that is in the nature of reparations for something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. But equally important, and some may say more important, making sure that from day one, after the compensation for those people that are eligible, that the system isn't and continues to be discriminatory. And that's the work that we've been doing painstakingly over the last few months with the Caring Society, with Plaintiffs' Counsel, under the guidance of Murray Sinclair, to make sure that we are moving to fix the system, whether it's reform of Jordan's principle, whether it's proper funding to agencies or communities that don't have agencies, focusing on investment in major capital, minor capital, and ensuring that from now on, this is a system that is a game changer for your children and your communities, which, when we talk about self-determination, is the building block of nationhood, which is the children. And having those ripped from you is something that has contributed to destroying nationhood. We have to put it in that context because it's important for everyone to realize the trauma that has occurred over all that time and not simply focus on liability. This is a game changer. Is it the be and end all? There are parts of this equation that we don't control, but we do have an important role in playing and making sure our partners in the provinces are acting the way they should. Every child that gets taken into care is done by a provincial entity. That's why reform of the system, whether it's through C-92 or any other instrument, is so key in creating those fertile conditions for communities to lift up what is an inherent right and should go without saying. I did want to put that into context, Chief Bernard, because I know that in some cases this is about boys and girls being left behind. So hopefully some of that will work to reform a system that's been broken for well over 30 years. Thank you.
Merci, Ministre Miller. Honorable Marc Miller, d'être venu nous parler, d'adresser l'Assemblée au nom de son ministère, le ministère des Crown-Indigenous Relations, ministère fédéral. Alors, un grand merci pour votre générosité, pour votre temps aussi. Je sais que le temps a été dépassé. Merci. Les chefs et mandataires sont très heureux, je crois, de vous avoir entendu, d'avoir pris le temps. Merci.